Hello and welcome back. In the last few sections we've been looking at trends, showing trends over time in particular. And one of the types of chart that we used there was the column chart. Now in this section we're going to start looking at comparisons between entities. Comparisons, or if you like, looking at the differences between entities. And in many ways column charts are good for that as well. However, when you start to use column charts, people almost invariably get the impression that in the horizontal direction you're looking at time. So when you get a group of columns such as in the gallery here, people tend to think that from left to right we're moving over time. Now the sort of comparisons and differences we're talking about now are not directly related to changes over time, although some of them specifically will be in some cases. And one way of getting around this tendency to think of column charts as being time-based is to use the type of column chart on its side that's called a bar chart. And basically bar charts really are just that, they're column charts on their side. And they're specifically used, as the tooltip here says, to compare values and to look at differences between values. Now we're going to start to look at bar charts with this particular worksheet where I have the lengths of some of the major African rivers. And I'm going to select the data that I want to chart, which is going to be first column which has the name of the river and the second column which has the length. And instead of going for my default chart type, which of course isn't bar chart, let's just refresh our minds on how we insert a chart normally. Go to the Insert tab, choose the type bar, and I'm going to choose a 2D bar to begin with, and just take the first option, which is clustered bar. And we get a pretty straightforward chart straight away. Again, I'll make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to see what it is. So we have the name of the river down on the left hand side, we have a legend saying length kilometers, we have an axis here with a scale, and then we have a chart title. That's all pretty straightforward, and as you can probably guess, the title, legend, axes and so on, you should all now be able to edit and set up exactly the way that you want without any trouble. Now one thing that takes a little bit of getting used to in relation to bar charts is that the entries in the chart are in reverse order in comparison with the spreadsheet. So in the spreadsheet Congo was first, on the chart Congo is last. You can actually change that if you go to the Layout tab and then click on Axes, Primary Vertical Axis, Primary Vertical Axis Options. There's an option here which enables you to, as it says here, present them in reverse order. So if I just check categories in reverse order, click on close, and now you can see that on the chart they're in the same order as they are on the worksheet. Now for this type of comparison, one of the big advantages that the bar chart has over the column chart is that on the left, on the vertical axis here, there's plenty of room to show, in this case, the names of the rivers horizontally, and even if the names here of the variable values are very long, there's no problem fitting them in, generally speaking. And you can actually sort the data and present the data in whatever way you want. So for instance, I've got these basically in alphabetical order of name of river. But if I were to go back to the original source data and sort it on length, the rivers will be shown in order of length. Now here's something new to make a note of. Let's suppose I want to show these in order of length. I don't actually need to redraw the chart or to delete it and start again. If I just go back, select my two columns, that's the river name and the length, go on to the Data tab, select sort and say that I want to sort by length. Click on OK, and my chart is updated automatically. Now I'm going to draw another bar chart now. This is for another selection of African countries and their male literacy rates. So insert bar again, go for the 3D option this time. So move the chart over here, make it a little bigger. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward. The name of the country, male literacy percent, the chart title is probably almost enough for itself. But I've actually got data here which also shows the female literacy figures, and we can actually put two bars on the same chart. Now of course, for the chart that I've got selected, I can see, if I click on the chart, the data that's been used to draw it, and it's bounded by these blue rectangles with the handles at each corner. And in fact, if I wanted to show both male and female literacy rates on the same bar chart, although I could delete this chart, select more data and start again effectively, there are a couple of other ways of doing it, and one of them is to grab that corner, drag it over here, and then automatically I get an updated bar chart with two bars, a red bar for the female literacy rate and a blue bar for the male literacy rate. Now of course I've lost my title, but you know how to put that back, and if I wanted to add axis titles or change the axes, that's straightforward enough. Now of course I mustn't lose sight of the information that's being given to me by these charts. This type of bar chart, where we have two bars for each of the countries showing the two literacy rates, makes interesting reading in itself. We can see how the female literacy rate is always lower. In Namibia the two are pretty close, whereas in Morocco and Ghana there's a very significant difference, and really this is what this sort of chart is all about. Now let's return to this question of selecting data for this sort of chart. I've just shown you how to increase from one bar per country to two. These little handles in the corners here are pretty useful because I could very easily go back to just having one bar. I can also drag the bar upwards and I could lose the Egyptian figures altogether. I've dragged and moved upwards. Now watch what happens to my chart when I release the mouse. Egypt has now gone, and similarly if I drag it left, I'm back to a single bar chart, male literacy without Egypt. Now as a general rule, and this will vary to a certain extent between the different types of graph or chart, as a general rule that's one way of changing the data that is actually addressed by a chart. And in fact there is indeed another way of doing this, which I hinted at much earlier on. If you go back to the Design tab under Chart Tools and go to Select Data, just move that dialog over slightly, you have the chart data range here, and at the moment it says equals literacy, that's the name of the worksheet, A1 to B5. If I were to change that to C5, I would get female literacy as well, and if I changed it to C4, I'd not only lose Egypt, but I'd lose Ghana as well. So just check those figures. So it would only go from basically Namibia to Libya. Click on OK, see what happens to my chart, and there we are. I'm back to having female and male literacy figures, but for just 3 countries. Now as a general rule, there are two good methods of changing the data range covered by a chart or graph. So let's now look at all of the main types of bar chart. Here I have some data relating to land use in 5 African countries, and if we start with straightforward these two columns, country and area in square kilometre, insert, straightforward bar, we'll go for a 3D bar, And it's a very straightforward chart, as you can see. Area on the horizontal axis and the names of the 5 countries. Now let me do a different type of analysis altogether. If I select the countries again and hold the control key down and select these 4 columns, these 4 columns represent the ways in which the land area for each country is divided. Got 4 categories: forests and jungles, cropland, meadows and pastures, and other. And the total of each of these will be the total land area of the country. Go to Insert Bar, hover over the tip there. The first one is Clustered Bar in 3D. And what this bar chart does is to compare the categories of land use, in this case, for each of the countries, and also, of course, between the countries. Click on 3D bar, and there we have our chart. Now, as we can see from this chart, for the larger countries, the largest of them all is Congo. We can see that a very large part of the land is forests and jungles. A small part, red, is cropland. If we look at Namibia, there is much less forest and jungle, but an awful lot of meadow and pasture. So we get some clear messages of how, from this bar chart, about the different distributions between these countries. And of course the total size of all the bars for each country represents the total land area of that country. So we've got the additional information of getting an idea of how big the countries are in comparison with each other. So we can see that Ghana, relatively speaking, is a very small country. The Congo is actually a very large country. In fact, the Congo is about the size of Western Europe. So let's now change this chart type. Sticking with the bar chart and going to the next category, which is the stacked bar in 3D. Let's see what that does. What happens here is that for each of our countries, the total area is represented by the length of the single bar. But each bar is divided according to the categories of land use. So for instance, for Namibia, smallish amount of forest and jungle, a tiny amount of cropland in there, a lot of meadow and pasture, and then a smaller amount of other. For Libya, there's effectively no forest and jungle, and a huge amount of other, which of course will mostly be desert. For Ghana, we have reasonable amount of forest and jungle, very small amount of cropland, and so on. Congo is mostly forests and jungles. Now, of course, this is showing the same information that the previous one showed, but it's showing it in a different way, and obviously it's a matter of personal preference which one suits your way of presenting your argument, and of course the argument you're trying to present. The bars give us a good idea of the relative size of the countries, and the land use within the countries are represented basically by the colour divisions, the stacking within the bars. So there's one more of these to look at. Change chart type again, and the third type of 3D bar is the 100% stacked bar in 3D. Now this one is really quite fundamentally different, because this one does not give us any impression of the relative sizes of the 5 countries. We've lost one piece of information, and what we have instead is that for each country we have a straightforward percentage split, really, of how much land is used in each of these 4 categories. So again, we can see that within Namibia we've got a very small amount of cropland in there. Within Libya we have no forests and jungles at all. Within Congo, most of the land is forests and jungles. So we've lost one piece of information, but on some occasions this type of percentage chart can be the sort of message that we want to put over. So there we are. In this section we've looked at using bar charts to see differences and comparisons. We've looked at different ways of changing the range of data that's covered by a chart, and some more ideas about formatting. In the next section we are going to look at the ubiquitous pie chart.